Now, you may subscribe to some of these channels, or many of them. Yellow Flash, Thinking Critical, Comics by Perch, Clownfish TV, Talking and Drawing with Shane Davis, NerdSync, Owen Likes Comics, Literature Devil, and many others. And one thing that may come to mind is, why do they complain so much? Want more of this kind of content? Do the YouTube thing or whatever social media thing and feed the algorithm. And let's get to our discussion. Now, social media and the internet in general seems to thrive on toxicity, and nerd culture, including comic books, are no exception. It seems that comic books in particular attracts more of the clickbaits and the hot takes. After all, it is only fiction, and whatever criticism opinions that can be formed are valid. It is literature, after all, and pretty much any interpretation seems to go and be credible. Got your Mary Sue's, representations, social justice warriors, Comicsgate, LGBT, buzzwords, cancel culture, and other loaded language all seem to have found a home on social media. And to someone like me who has been a fan of the medium of the nerdy, I find these words to have an odd doublespeak to them, because depending on the crowds, these words take on a different meaning. Kind of like that one book, 1984. All of that content that's sent around these buzzwords can't really get around from sounding like they are just complaining.
You're whinging about.
I'm not whinging.
Your lips are moving and you're complaining about something. That's
It's
whinging.
usually around this point when both sides of whatever issue start pointing the fingers at each other. Basically, they're saying, they started it, or this is ruining the industry because of you guys, toxic fans. Basically, a rally of back and forth of trying to give the ultimate mic drop insult moment. And it's being done at the cost of the medium itself. Let me explain. Let's look at some of the recent issues that plagued 2022 and 2021 that centered around the comic book industry. For example, your I Am Not Starfire, your MOM's MCU stuff like Kamala Khan or America Chavez. Daredevil had some issues. We got your bisexual Robins, your gay Supermans, etc., etc. Now, irregardless of your stance on whatever controversy is the central issue, we can see that from the other commentators, similar to your Thinking Criticals or your Yellow Flash, or from their opposites like Comic Drake or Comic Tropes. Um, they always center around the controversy as if their stance on the issue determines whether or not they are a moral person. Videos come down to a central formulaic sentence. Usually it's the quote, if you do not think this way, then you are an X. For example, if you do not like I Am Not Starfire, then you're a sexist, or if you do like I Am Not Starfire, you're an SJW. And for any title, you'll find these kind of videos that showcase this point as their thesis. Now, some may take the time and create a persuasive essay, or many, like the Quartering, for example, will give some sort of hasty hot take complaint. And all these hot takes get pretty repetitive because, you see one hot take, you see them all, basically. And since they all are within their own little bubble or their side, and they have their echo chambers, not unlike your creationists or any sort of anti-science crowd, science tangent aside, well, these sort of team cheerleading complaints, and that's what these videos are, cheerleading complaints, do little to address whatever issues people may have within the medium itself. Why? Because ultimately it's too abstract or vague to be useful. If I say that the latest issue of Spider Man, for example, was way too feminist, one can easily agree or disagree and provide multiple issues of when it was or wasn't. And since neither side will easily address the other side's issues being brought forth, and even less will admit when they're wrong, this leads to no solution. I think we can all agree that whoever your creative is, your writer or your illustrator, they can put out whatever they want. Or in the case of many American comic books, the corporations can put out whatever they want, and they can and they will do so. Now, simply putting in whatever themes, be it feminism, representation, LGBT issues, isn't enough to do a hot take or warrant a complaint, no matter how much one feels about these issues, especially at the beginning of the 21st century. And any social media influencer, be it your video essayist or 3 minute TikToker, who does, probably should be ignored if they're complaining. And I'm paraphrasing the late great Hitchens, who once said anything asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, and most of these influencers are simply doing just that, asserting things without evidence or simply are dismissive of any evidence that goes against their narrative, and this applies to both sides equally. What one can say is whether or not such works were successful in the conveying of their theme to their audience, and not specifically to only their catered audience, which simply will be an echo chamber, as demonstrated by numerous fandoms and their toxicity on social media. Simply put, if you find success in your catered audience, which is a good thing for the most part, then it makes your work safe. The real challenge is to go beyond the audience it is catered for. It isn't necessary if one is simply making a work of fiction, but when one wants to make a work of fiction to have some sort of statement, specifically in regard to, let's say, our current social systems, such as governments or civil rights, then it is more important to go beyond your catered audience. And since the recent discussions around comic books tend to revolve around this business of making a statement, the success of any such work is determined by how well it reaches beyond its catered audience. That being said, we must remember several things. Firstly, companies such as Disney, who owns Marvel, or Warner Brothers, who own DC, and other similar companies, aren't a place to go for some moral stance. And even though they have produced stories that can be read as allegories or metaphors to society today, it's not really something to be taken that seriously, since these companies have a singular purpose: make money. Whether they do this while wearing the visage of being on the right side of history or not doesn't matter to these companies, as long as they make their money, no matter how much you say they need to do the right thing. And speaking of the right thing, secondly, most of these social media influencers who respond to the quote unquote controversies aren't sources of ethics or morality in these issues regarding civil rights and whatnot. Simply because they are driven in the very much the same way as these big companies are driven, ultimately to make money, very much like the mainstream media that they seem to love to hate on, and for good reason. But these guys tend to make mountains out of molehills, and thus shouldn't be taken very seriously unless shown otherwise. And I'm talking about the whole full bibliography, academic level, you know, nullius in verba. And if they're going to do that much, then yeah, you take them seriously. But until then, you don't need to. In fact, they're probably better off being ignored. Thirdly, we have to recognize that people do take them seriously. Very similar to Joe Rogan and his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. The more famous one becomes, the more credible it will seem to their audience. And as unfair as it sounds, that means these creators, in spite of claims of being a big dummy or just a comedian, need to take that into account and should be doing more of a thorough job when they are conveying information. Now, an objection that one can see to those who oppose this view of being more thorough is that these influencers would want to, their viewership will drop, which would lessen their income. And that is a fair objection, but that just means that their content that they make has to be taken that much less seriously since they're not willing to accept the consequences of their actions or take responsibility for their actions. Finally, it has to be recognized that these influencers have the ability to shift the algorithm. Mind you, it wouldn't be easy. After all, it is easily shown that these clickbait style opinion news nerd channels thrive on the hate. But it would be easy to diversify what they cover and how they cover it. Many of the whinge content creators simply go where the algorithm tells them to. Why? Because if they don't, the algorithm won't show their videos. But considering the sizable number of subscribers and viewers that the bigger influencers have, I'm talking your 6 digit plus, subscribers, content creators, it would be simpler for them to start the trend. It may not be for every other video, but it can be as simple as every third video or every fourth video. But by simply increasing the number of videos that should be taken seriously and praising the parts of the nerd industry that they enjoy would give the algorithm more reason to choose those videos or to push for those videos. Instead of turning the wheel, one should strive to break it. Otherwise, you get this. And we all know that was a bad result. Thank you for listening to my view on this particular subject. I hope you have enjoyed it, or if you watched it this far, kudos to you. You should give yourself a pat on the back. Don't forget to subscribe, do the YouTube thing, feed the algorithm, and whatnot. And I hope you are having a good day or good evening. Ciao, everybody.